How do you emerge from being inexperienced? And what does the whole process of quote unquote career discernment look like? How do you find a path in your life? How do you find a way to go? That's sort of what I wanted to talk about today. And this is a subject that so many people talk about, but I'm hoping that I can offer my own thoughts and perspectives and advice for you. So I'm hoping that the audience of this video is somebody who's in their first couple of years of college. They're still trying to figure out what they want to major in, or maybe they've already decided on something, and they're trying to, they have all of these pressures that are coming at them from a thousand different places. And, you have all these different things um, to think about. And, I just think it's so much. And hopefully I can sort of help put it in a more, maybe not straightforward, definitely not straightforward, but I'm hoping that I can provide my own thoughts. So, the first thing to know is that this takes a really long time. It takes years and years. And even the older adults that I talk to, a lot of them say, well, you know what? I haven't even figured it out. So clearly it's something that you never 100% get to. And I'm certainly not there either. Um, and I just think it's a really uncomfortable thing to know, but it is true. And so if you just sit with that fact, just start by getting over the fact that it's uncomfortable. And I think that even just by doing that, you'll set yourself up well. You're just accepting that it's slow. And so then I think the thing that you should do is make a list of all of the things that you're interested in. And the caveat to this that I really want to emphasize is make a list of literally everything. Don't stop at, what are the things that are going to make me the most money? Because so many people do stop there. And I think that's a bad way to go. You know, or they think about what the things that they're purely just committed to. And I think that's also a bad way to go. Think about everything, all encompassing. Um, and try to group some of those things together. So, maybe, you're interested in music, and you want to, you could be a session musician or, a mixing engineer or something. And so you sort of group them together. And then what you can do is literally just do very basic, and I mean super basic, just Google searches, really. Uh, Research on each of those things. And then you at least have something to go off. You're not starting from nothing anymore. You have a little bit of information about that. You have no experience yet, but you have a little bit of information. And I think that can even get you a long way because you read something or you're like, oh my gosh, that seems awful, and then you're like, well, that's out now, and then you kind of narrow it down. So I think that's the first step is just thinking about all those things, talking to real people is also important. I'm going to talk about that a lot later. But even at this preliminary stage, if you know somebody who's in that field, talk to them about it. Just have a really basic discussion. Don't get into super fine detail about anything. Just have a really basic discussion about, why you're interested in it and, what motivates you to pursue that line of work. And that can get you, a little bit further because you now know a little bit of information. So now you're not going off nothing anymore. You're going off a little bit of information, right? So once you've done that with all of your different fields of interest, then you have knowledge of what you actually might want to do. Now it's time to go do things purely for the sake of experiment. I really want to emphasize that part of it purely for the sake of experiment. What I mean by that is that at this stage, you're not trying to get 100% certain. No, no, no. You're getting maybe 10% certain through this. And that doing things for an experiment, depends on what field you're in. But, you might go do an internship, or maybe you have a band that you play with, and you're going to write arrangements for them. Or maybe you're interested in a business venture, and you're going to go, talk to somebody at a company. Maybe you're going to go have an internship at that company. Maybe you're just going to go visit that company, and just sits in their company headquarters, and you're just gonna observe things, or the same case in a classroom. You're just gonna sit in the classroom. You're not gonna teach any student, but you're just gonna sit and watch. How is this done? What are the things that I like and that I don't like about this? So, a variety of different examples. Those are just a couple. But just doing things purely for the sake of an experiment, you are not trying to get 100% certain. And I think the thing that really bothers me is, I used to be on Instagram, and I'm not on there anymore. But, I used to see posts every single day about, like, oh, you have to be 100% certain, because it's a waste of money. And, of course, everybody puts everything in terms of money. And, I think money is valid, but I do not think that everything needs to be put in terms of money. It should be a learning thing for you. You're going to go take a class over the summer, as in the case of one of my friends, who I was just having this conversation with, and he was like, "Well, I'm going to go take these classes," and I'm like, "Great, because you're going to learn something that you don't know yet." And so, you're going to have that experience, right? So you're not trying to get 100% there. I really, really want to emphasize that. Through doing that, through doing that, you will get to know people, because you're going to be out in the world. And I really think that that's incredibly important. I have a really good example of that, actually. I am not religious at all. I don't go to church or anything, but I have worked for pastors, and I have worked for churches. How did I do that? Because I'm out in the world and I get to know people. And I really, and now I have the utmost respect for churches, because now I've been in them enough. And I think churches are great. I'm not a worshiper, but I really love the stuff that I've done. So, I'm not directly involved in the activities of the church, but I've done some perhaps remedial things. I've been a church musician. I've run the soundboard for churches. I've done podcasts for churches. So that's just an example. I don't, I'm not really, like, in that world, so to speak, but I am, because I got to know pastors, and that's how that worked. So, you get to know enough people, and you come into a line of work that you don't even know about. So I think that's really, really, really important. And just, the more people you meet, the more opportunities you might get. And the right people, and then you get an opportunity. And it's just, don't even think about it in terms of, well, I have to meet 100 people over the course of a summer. I heard that. I can't even remember. Somebody told me that you have to, like, over the course of a summer, in between your, like, freshman and sophomore year of college, like, you have to meet 100 people. I'm like, oh my God. No, 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 no. No, none of that should be quantified at all. It should be a meaningful thing. You meet one person, and that's a meaningful connection, and there you go. Or you meet 100 people, and all of them are meaningful, or none of them are, whatever. But I really, yeah, stop quantifying, stop quantifying things. I think that's a general belief of mine. Of course, I think, some things should be quantified, and I can make a whole video about that. But, you know, really just don't think about it in terms of a number at all. And the other thing is, like, building a personal connection to those people. You might go to their house. I did that a couple times with a mastering engineer, and I got to know this mastering engineer. He's a great guy, and I went to his house. I mean, he has a nice home studio, and I went to his house, and I spent like a whole afternoon a couple times at his house. We just had a conversation. Like he didn't like give me anything. He didn't like, we just had a conversation, and I think, now I have this personal connection with this guy, so I think that's an important thing to remember too, is you're not trying to get something necessarily out of a personal connection, though that could happen. Um, so the other thing is you have to be thoughtful. You have to be a thoughtful individual. And I think most people in general are very thoughtful people. But I think that the problem is that I've observed with a few people that I've known over the years is that they get so bogged down in terms of, again, quantifying things, or they get stuck in the loop of social media. Oftentimes I think social media ruins so much. I think it has its benefits, and I think it also ruins everything. But I really think that you have to maintain your own sense of diligence and respect, and you have to think about the consequences of something, when you're going in. You have to think about, well, what is this person going to, what can this person actually help me with, and what are the things that they are probably not going to help me with. So then you come in with a reasonable expectation. I think that you've just got to be a thoughtful individual. You have to be a kind person, for first and foremost. You have to have all those attributes. I think that's so important. You can't be rude, obviously. You can't, be pushy. You just take things at their own pace, and just be a kind person. I think is the most important part of this whole process, really. And I think after you've repeated this experimentation enough, and this is really how it's gone for me personally, after you repeated this experimentation enough, you'll be able to narrow down your options a little bit. Uh, and then you'll be able to think about what are the things that are actually going to be realistic for me. Um, and what are the things that are not going to be realistic. And I've had to admit, which is I feel very guilty sometimes, because I've had to admit to some friends of mine, it's like, you know what? I am not interested in going down your path. I have the utmost respect for the way that you're going, and I think you're gonna do an amazing job in the world. But I'm not gonna do that. And I think some of them they want me to come along with them, and it's just like, I'm gonna make the choice that I'm gonna make. And none of them are being pushy, or imposing an undue pressure. But I do feel that with a handful of people, and I just, I've got to say, you know what, I'm going to make the choice that I'm going to make, and that is not going to be my choice. And so I think that's the thing that you've really got to understand too. You don't want to do all the things that your friends do. You want to do all the things that make you feel valued, and make you feel happy. And if somebody is forcing you, if somebody is forcing you to do something, or you're being pressured, I think you gotta have a discussion with them, because I think that's really not okay, to be honest. Nobody should be pressuring you to do one thing or another. Of course, we want our friends to do certain things. Sometimes, at least, there are a few friends of mine who is like, oh, I really, I want them to do this, that, and the other. But it's like, I can't pressure them at all. That's not nice. It's not going to help them at all. Um, And so I think that's something to remember. It works in the opposite direction too. Somebody can't pressure you, nor can you pressure them. So that's something to remember. And then once you've finally done something for real, you have an experience. You go on tour, you have an internship somewhere, you're working in that field, maybe actually have a full-time job. Then you can decide, do I like this or not? And if you like it, then you can move on with it. And if you don't like it, then you say, well, that option's out, and then you go back to the drawing board, review all your prior options, think of new options because new options always come up. It's all a repeating cycle. It's just like, I really think at least for me personally, it's a repeating cycle. It's like, well, I have this one idea, I take a couple of years to think about it and literally a couple of years. I mean, it's a very slow process. And it's like, well, you know what? Do I want to do this? No. And I'm like, well, that's not a waste of time at all. It took 2 years to figure out that I don't want to do this. But is that a waste of time? No, because had I not spent 2 years figuring it out, I would not have known otherwise. So, just yeah, it's that the cycle then repeats. You figure out something that you want to do, and then you get more specific. You're like, oh, I want to go, I don't know of a very good biology example because I'm not in that field at all. But, like say you're studying biology and biology is so general, you could do 1,000 different things. And you could then come up and say, I had this experience and I worked in a biotech firm. And it's like, oh, that was terrible. I hated that. It was boring. It was unfulfilling and the people were my coworkers were terrible and of course a lot of that could be company culture, but all that stuff. This field is not for me. It's for a different type of person, and I'm not that type of person. I felt that with a lot of different things, and and so I'm gonna transition into I don't know like engineering or medicine or I want to become a surgeon or what have you, and and so I'm gonna transition to something. So it could be, a very sort of interfield decision that you make, or you could be in the a music example, which I'm much more familiar with. I want to be a touring musician, and I want to go out, tour all over the West Coast. A very good friend of mine's, doing that right now. He's got a bluegrass band. He's going all over the West Coast. And I think he really likes it. But even just in a hypothetical example, you could be touring all over the West Coast, and you're like, oh, this sucks. I don't want to do this. And then you say, you know, I actually, then I want to record or I want to do things in a more local music scene or, just you can even just change things just regarding that. So it doesn't have to be, I'm going to go from one field entirely to another. It could be something else, entirely just more focused in one particular field. I think the other thing that I honestly might warrant a part two of this is because I think my thoughts are I'm kind of out of material for this, but the other part of this process is putting two unrelated things together and then forming a conclusion based on putting two things together. And that is something that I learned how to do in political science classes. And it has actually been able to transfer in so many different ways that I would never have expected. It's such an interesting thing because oftentimes in those political science classes, the final exam is like you have two books uh, and you have to pull quotations from the books for during the exam and it's open book and but the questions are really hard and it's like well you have to write about how does this relate to this other theory in this book or how does this theory in this book relate to a guest speaker that we had in the class, or as was the case in one of my recent exams. But it's like that skill transfers absolutely to this whole process of finding your own path, because um, you could think about, I have a job as a session musician, or something in your recording studio, and then you're like, I don't know, this example might be terrible, it's just off the top of my head, but then you could be like, I want to go, teach or something. And it's like, well, yeah, actually, I think that's a very good example, because then you can use your experience as a session musician and as a teacher. I mean, those two things are seemingly unrelated, but they actually are very related once you put them together. It's like, well, you have a career as a session musician, and as a teacher, you have those two different interests, and then you can work in that realm, and be able to do that. An example from my own life, or well, my own process of figuring this out is, I am thinking a lot now about how is a college accredited? I think that question is fascinating, and I could go on forever about that. Um, what sorts of data are needed to make a decision about a program? How is a program funded, and all these questions I think are really interesting. But I am a professional musician, right? I have a lot of experience out in the world as a professional musician. And I have this interest in, knowing about how an institution is managed. And so it's like, well, what can I do? I can put those two things together, and like the National Association of Schools of Music is an accrediting body. They recruit people who have a background in music, right? So I have this background, I have a working knowledge of how the career of a professional musician goes. I know that world really well, right? And I know the things that should be implemented at a school probably should help a student get on that path. That's just an example, but so you can put two seemingly unrelated things together and get things that you would have never thought about. So also, just quick pitch, take political science classes. I think they're fascinating. And I'm not, I don't want to become a politician at all, but it's just like the way of thinking that you have to learn to do well in those classes is just entirely different thing. And it's taught me so much, and been able to transfer that knowledge, obviously, to this process too. So that's about as far as my thoughts go today. But I'm hoping to talk more about this. And if you have any questions or things that you want me to talk about, I can talk about those. But I have other things related to this topic that I want to make videos about. So stay tuned. I'll be having more videos that are not Zoom videos. I'm just still wrapping up my term here, so I'm not quite back home yet. But I will be soon, and then I'll be recording videos actually, with my whole self, rather than a virtual background of a rustic office, which is the search term that I put in to find this picture, a rustic office. I don't know whether or not this is a rustic office, but whatever. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. And I'll see you soon.